On my 68th birthday, I received a mysterious gift. No card, no sender's name, just a few cold words. Happy birthday. But I recognized that handwriting immediately. The handwriting I could never forget from the son I had raised for 20 years. I hadn't seen it in 3 years. I opened the box, a limited edition bottle of whiskey so beautiful you'd want to keep it as a display piece. But Ethan didn't know I had given up drinking 3 years ago because of my heart condition. Instead of opening it, I gave it to Robert Carson, his father-in-law. Just a bottle of whiskey. Or so I thought. Until I learned that the gift had nearly taken both our lives. And that was only the beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. I set the bottle on the kitchen table. Morning light streamed in through the blinds, cutting the room into bands of gold and shadow. The whiskey caught the light like it was holding fire inside. The label was deep green with gold lettering, the kind of design you know costs more than the liquid itself. I ran my thumb over the wax seal on the cork, feeling its smoothness under the ridges of my skin. Whiskey used to be my thing. Not in a sloppy way, but in a slow, deliberate way. A single glass at the end of a day fixing fence posts or cleaning out the gutters. Back when Linda was alive, she'd pour us both one after dinner on Sundays. We'd sit out on the porch swing, let the crickets fill the silence. That was before the heart attack took the choice away. I haven't touched a drop since. Ethan knew that. He'd been right there in the hospital when the doctor laid it all out for me, the long list of things I couldn't eat or drink anymore if I wanted to see 70. He didn't say much, then just stared down at his phone, thumbs moving. I told myself he was trying to distract himself. Now I'm not so sure. We hadn't had a blowout fight, not the kind you see in movies where someone storms out and slams the door. No, we just stopped. First he skipped a Sunday dinner. Then he didn't come for Thanksgiving. By the second Christmas without him, I realized we weren't talking at all. Silence has a way of becoming its habit. So to see his handwriting again after all this time, it pulled something tight in my chest. Not joy, not even relief. Just a weight I couldn't name. The envelope taped to the side of the package was plain white. Inside was a single card with happy birthday in blue ink. No dad, no signature. Just the 2 words standing there like they were afraid to say more. I didn't open the bottle, didn't even think about it. I slid it to the far side of the table and turned back to my coffee, which had gone cold. The clock over the stove ticked in a steady, deliberate way that made the house feel even emptier. Robert Carson's face came to mind. Robert is the kind of man who's never shown up empty-handed or without a set of tools in the truck bed. 2 summers ago, after a bad storm stripped half the shingles off my roof, he was on a ladder by 8 a.m., hammer in hand, before I'd even had my first cup of coffee. He's the sort who doesn't wait to be asked for help. If anyone deserved something nice, it was him. And since I couldn't drink the whiskey myself, the thought of it gathering dust on my shelf felt wrong. Robert would open it, share it with friends, and give it a story to tell. That felt better than watching it fade behind glass. By mid-afternoon, the bottle was buckled into the passenger seat of my old Chevy. I don't know why I did that habit, maybe, but the idea of it tumbling around on the ride made me uneasy. The sun was tilting west, painting everything with that amber light you only get in late October. The fields along County Road 6 were starting to go brown soybeans cut down to stubble. The air smelled faintly of smoke from someone's burn pile. Robert's place sits on a rise at the edge of town, a white clapboard house with a wraparound porch that always looks like it belongs in a postcard. I pulled up gravel, crunching under the tires, and killed the engine. He opened the door before I could knock, wearing a red flannel shirt and faded jeans, sawdust still clinging to his boots. His eyes went straight to the bottle in my hands. "Frank, what's this?" he asked, stepping forward. "From Ethan," I said, offering it to him. His eyebrows lifted. "Ethan sent you this?" "Yeah. Figured you might enjoy it more than I would." He took it carefully, turning it to read the label. "This is something, Frank. This is the kind of bottle you put away for a special night. Then make tonight special," I said, and meant it. He grinned. "I think I will. Thank you. It felt good to hand it off to see it land where it would be appreciated. I got back in the truck, the late light slanting across the dashboard. Driving home, I kept thinking about the bottle, not in a thirsty way, but in a curious way. Ethan never spent that kind of money without a reason. Hell, half the time when he was younger, he'd borrow cash from me for gas and forget to pay it back. So why now? Why a gift that he knew I wouldn't use? The thought itched at the back of my mind as I pulled into the driveway. I shut it down. Not everything needs a reason, I told myself. But I didn't believe it. That evening, I made a pot roast and the house filled with the smell of onions and carrots. The kind of meal that's better shared, though I ate it alone. The wall clock ticked its way toward 9. I was washing the last plate when the phone rang, not the cell, the landline. Almost no one calls on that anymore. "Hello, Dad." Ethan's voice. Smooth, casual, like no time had passed. I leaned against the counter. Ethan. "Happy birthday," he said, a beat too late to sound natural. "You got my gift, I did." "Well, what'd you think? It's a nice bottle. Did you try it yet?" His tone shifted just slightly sharper at the edges. "No. I passed it along to Robert. Thought he'd get more use out of it." Silence. Not a dropout, not static. Just a long, heavy pause. "You gave it to Robert." His voice had cooled. "That's right." There was a sound like an exhale, slow and measured. "Huh." Then the line went dead. I stared at the receiver for a moment before setting it back in its cradle. The clock kept ticking. My gut felt unsettled, not from the roast, but from something less tangible. The way he'd asked about the whiskey like it mattered in a way it shouldn't. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, but sleep came slowly. When I did drift off, it was light and restless, the kind that leaves you more tired when you wake. The next morning, I tried to shake it off, poured a fresh cup of coffee, sat down with the paper. But the phone rang again midday this time. The caller ID flashed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. "Mr. Dalton," a voice said when I answered. "Yes. This is Linda Carson, Robert's wife." Her voice was tight. "I thought you should know Robert's in the hospital. He collapsed this morning. They think it might be some kind of poisoning." The coffee in my hand went cold instantly. Poisoning. "He was fine last night," she said. "We had a drink with dinner, and this morning he could barely stand. The doctors are running tests." I didn't speak. My eyes went to the counter, to the empty spot where the whiskey had been less than 24 hours ago. "Did he eat anything unusual?" she asked. My mouth felt dry. "No, but I gave him a bottle yesterday. Whiskey. From Ethan." There was a pause. In the background, I could hear hospital noises, monitors beeping, and a cart squeaking down a hallway. "I'll tell the doctors," she said finally. "If you think of anything else, anything, call me." I promised I would, then hung up. I stood in the kitchen, the house silent around me. The October light had turned pale and flat. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally did, it was to walk to the trash bin. Something white caught my eye near the bottom, a small plastic vial like the kind vitamins come in. No label, just a faint dusting of powder clinging to the inside. I didn't remember throwing it away. I picked it up. The cap was screwed on tight. I went to the fridge. On the middle shelf sat a mason jar with about half a cup of whiskey in it, left over from pouring Robert a taste before I'd given him the bottle. I hadn't even remembered keeping it until that moment. My hands shook as I took it out and set it on the counter next to the vial. Gary. Gary and I had served together 30-odd years ago, and now he ran a small veterinary lab on the edge of town. He owed me a favor from a few winters back when I'd pulled his truck out of a ditch. I called him. "Gary, I need you to test something for me." Quietly. "What is it, Whiskey?" "And maybe something else." He didn't ask more questions, just told me to meet him after closing. That evening I drove out to his lab, the mason jar wrapped in a paper bag on the seat beside me. Gary met me in the parking lot, lab coat over a sweatshirt, the smell of disinfectant faint in the air. "This is the kind of thing I'm going to regret," he asked. "Just tell me what's in it," I said. He nodded, took the bag and disappeared inside. I sat in the truck with the engine running, watching the light fade from the sky. The radio was off. My thoughts went back over the last 24 hours, retracing every step. The handwriting, the bottle, Ethan's voice when I told him I'd given it to Robert, that long, heavy pause. My stomach tightened. Gary called the next day, just after noon. "Frank, you're not going to like this. There's something in the whiskey. White snake root. In the right dose, it'll stop a man's heart." I closed my eyes. The phone felt heavy in my hand. "You said Robert drank this?" "Yes." "You didn't?" "No." He let out a slow breath. "Then you might have just dodged a bullet." And that's where the first part of this story ends, not with answers, but with a question that would take me places I never thought I'd have to go. Because the moment I hung up, I knew Ethan had sent me more than a gift. He'd sent me a message. I used to think there was no sound worse than the phone ringing in the middle of the night. Turns out there is. It's the phone ringing when you already know deep down the news will be bad. When Gary hung up after telling me the whiskey had white snake root in it, the world around me went very still, like the house was holding its breath. I didn't sit with it. I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair, slid my truck keys off the hook by the door, and headed for St. Luke's. The drive into town was all stoplights and empty intersections, the kind of late morning where the sun looks bright but gives no warmth. I parked in the far corner of the lot out of habit and walked fast, one hand in my pocket, the other pressed to my ribs like I could steady whatever was shifting inside me. Hospitals all smell the same, something sterile cut with burnt coffee, and the light is always too white. A volunteer pointed me to Robert's room. He didn't look like the man who climbed my roof without being asked. He looked lighter, washed out, his skin a shade paler than the pillow under his head. The monitors at his bedside hummed and blinked in time with a slow, stubborn heartbeat. Linda was in a plastic chair pulled as close as it could get. She had that look I've seen 100 times, the one people wear when they're waiting on something that refuses to hurry up and be over. "Frank," she said, getting up. "Thank you for coming. How is he?" They're trying to stabilize his heart rhythm." Her hands were clasped together at her chest, not praying, but as if holding air tight would keep it from leaking out of her. "They said they found signs of a plant toxin. They're running more tests." I stepped closer to the bed. Robert's mouth was parted, a line of breath in, a line of breath out. His hair, always combed back neatly, had fallen toward his forehead in a way that made him look younger and more fragile at the same time. I didn't belong here as family, not on paper. But blood isn't the only measure of closeness. Sometimes it's the person who shows up with a hammer and a smile before you've had time to worry that your roof might leak. "Did he eat anything unusual last night?" I asked. "Or drink anything he doesn't normally? We both had one glass with dinner." She looked at me, the question already there. "The bottle you brought." He said it was the nicest whiskey he'd ever tasted. He wanted to save the rest for something special. My jaw set without me telling it to. "I need you to tell the doctors exactly that I said. Tell them it was new, unopened. And tell them I can get them a small sample from the same bottle." She reached out like she might take my hand, then changed her mind and gripped the rail instead. "Frank, what is this? Do you think I don't know what I think I said, which was only half a lie? But I'm going to find out." The doctor came in, a man in his 50s with a face that had learned not to react. He explained in quiet, practiced tones about rhythms and enzymes and observation. He didn't say what he didn't know, and he didn't know a lot yet. When he left, Linda sat back down, and I promised to call her as soon as I had anything she could use. She nodded, but the nod had no weight. It was something to do with her head, because her hands were already committed to staying clenched. I walked out with my jaw still tight and my hands jammed into my jacket pockets. The automatic doors slid open and hit me with air that felt wrong for October, bright as a postcard and cold as a church. In the truck, I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there with the key halfway turned and looked at my reflection in the rear view. I looked like a man who had nothing left to break that hadn't already been cracked once. White snake root, I said aloud, testing the words in the air like a carpenter checking a board for warp. They sounded mean. They sounded deliberate. On the way home, the road unspooled like a tape you've listened to too many times. I turned onto my street and noticed nothing else: the mailboxes, the dog at the corner house, the man raking leaves with his son. I locked the truck without thinking, and went straight to the refrigerator. The mason jar with the splash of whiskey was still there on the center shelf, hidden behind the milk. I held it up to the light and watched the liquid curl against the glass when I tilted it. You wouldn't know by looking. You never do. All the worst things come dressed like something harmless. I put the jar down next to the sink and crossed to the trash. I'd tossed that little white vial in yesterday. I hadn't taken the bag out. I'm an old man living alone, and my trash doesn't fill as fast as it used to. I lifted the lid, looked, and felt my body go still. The bag had been lifted and put back the wrong way around, and the vial was gone. I looked at the door. The deadbolt was set like I'd left it last night. The windows were down and latched. I keep no spare keys under rocks or mats. I keep no spare keys anywhere a reasonable fool might imagine. Still, someone had been here. I could feel it, like the way you know a room has been rearranged, even if you can't name what moved. I took a long breath in through my nose and let it out slowly. Not panic. Panic is loud and stupid. I needed something quiet and useful. I picked up the phone and called Gary. "It's gone," I said when he answered. "What is the little vial I told you about?" "Someone took it out of my trash. I didn't move it. I know what my own hands have done in my own house." He didn't tell me I might be mistaken. Gary understands the cost of ignoring what your gut already knows. "You need to get law enforcement looped in," he said. "I can document what's in the whiskey, but that vial would have been clean proof of handling." "I know," I said. "I will. And Frank." "Yeah. Don't let whoever did this think you're sleeping on it." "I'm not," I said, and ended the call. I made coffee I didn't want and sat at the table with a legal pad. The act of writing steadies me. I drew a line down the center of the page and labeled the left side, "What I know," and the right side, "What I can prove." Under "What I know," I wrote, "Ethan sent the bottle. Ethan asked if I'd tried it. Ethan changed tone when I said I gave it to Robert. The whiskey Gary tested has white snake root. The vial is missing." Under "What I can prove," I wrote Gary's test. The leftover sample is in the jar. The call from Ethan last night, if my memory holds. Then I stared at the two columns and wanted to draw a bridge between them. Bridges don't appear because you want them to. You have to build them. I took the small digital voice recorder out of the desk drawer. It's old, a little scuffed at the corners, a cheap thing that has done its job without ever getting thanked for it. I checked the battery half full. I slid it into the inside pocket of my jacket, right where the weight of it would feel like a hand on my chest, reminding me to breathe. It was just past noon by the time I pulled into Ethan's development. His house sat in a row of other houses that looked like variations of the same idea: neutral siding, brass numbers of porch light that came on by itself when the sun started to quit. His truck was in the driveway, clean newer than mine by a decade. I walked up the path and knocked. He opened the door with a face that flipped twice before landing surprise, then calculation, then something he thought looked like warmth. "Dad," he said, like he'd been expecting me, and also like he had no idea what I could want. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" I asked and stepped inside without waiting. The place smelled like lemon and nothing else. He keeps it neat, always has everything at right angles, nothing left out of place except for the kind of books you buy to display you know something about them. "I heard about Robert," he said, closing the door. "Scary. Laya's with him now. The doctors think it might be a virus." "Is that what they think?" I kept my tone flat. If I pushed, he'd set his heels. If I showed softness, he'd use it. "That's what she said," he replied. That's what they're saying. I took it to the kitchen. There on the counter sat 3 bottles, 2 bourbon, 1 rye, lined up like soldiers. None of them was the brand I'd given him. None of them opens. I looked back at him. He was watching me watch his things, and he smiled like someone who believes the way his smile looks is the way it lands. "Did you try the bottle you sent me?" I asked. He laughed softly. "The whole point was for you to enjoy it. You know, for your birthday. You know I don't drink anymore." "People change," he said with a shrug that made me feel like I was of no particular interest. I moved 1 step closer to the counter and ran a finger along the rim of the empty glass sitting by the sink like a man might when he's killing time while his host makes coffee. "Robert liked it," I said. Said his favorite pour was the one from the middle shelf, the single malt. He blinked just once, slower than a reflex. "Yeah." "Funny thing," I said, and I could feel the recorder in my pocket steady as a heartbeat. "I never told you where it was stored." For the smallest fraction of a second, he went still the way an animal does when it hears a twig snap. Then his mouth pulled up on one side and he shook his head with a little practiced laugh. "You must have. You get chatty when you're sentimental." "I didn't," I said, and held his eyes until he had to pick whether to look away or stare me down. He chose a third option. He reached for a dish towel and started drying a glass that had already been dried. "Dad," he said, looking at the glass instead of me, "you always overthink. You always find something to fix, even when no one asked for it. You sent me a $500 bottle I can't drink," I said. "I'm trying to fix that." He put the glass down and spread his hands like a man with nothing to hide. "Then maybe don't. Maybe give me the benefit of the doubt for once." His voice could pass for reasonable if you hadn't been listening to it for 30-something years. My son has a way of sounding true when he is rehearsed. That pause from last night sat between us like a third person in the room sitting on the counter and swinging its legs. "I'm going to ask you a question," I said, "and I'm going to let the silence after it tell me the answer." He gave me a look like we were playing chess and I'd announced my next move aloud. "Okay, did you tamper with that whiskey silence? It's a living thing when you use it right." The fridge hummed. The clock on the microwave clicked from 12:09 to 12:10. A car passed outside slow enough that we both heard the tires over the pavement. He didn't look away. He also didn't speak. "Goodbye, Ethan," I said, because sometimes leaving is the only sentence that counts. He said my name as I turned Dad in that tone where the word is both a hook and a warning. I stopped, but I didn't turn back. "You keep accusing me of things, you'll push me away," he said. "I'm not accusing." I told the door. "I'm collecting." Outside, the air was sharp and a little metallic. I sat in the truck and pressed my thumb against the recorder's stop button. The red light blinked off. I set it on the seat beside me and stared at it like it was a witness I might have to call later. My hands were steady, my head was not. I didn't drive home. Not yet. I parked at the far edge of a grocery store lot where no one would bother me and made a call I had been putting off since the moment Gary said white snake root. "Detective Reyes," a voice said after 2 rings. "Detective, my name is Frank Dalton. I believe I may have information about a poisoning. I have a sample of the substance and an audio recording that might interest you." He didn't ask me to explain myself right there on the phone. Men who know their work don't demand the whole truth in the first breath. "Can you come in this afternoon?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I can." He gave me a time and an office number tucked into the back hallway of the station. When I hung up, I sat with my hands on the wheel and looked straight ahead. The grocery store's automatic doors kept opening for no one and closing for no one else. People came and went carrying paper bags full of apples and milk and things that would make their houses smell like dinners, I remember. Back at the house, I stopped at the mailbox because sometimes you need to do something ordinary to keep the other things from swallowing you whole. Flyers, a bill, a grocery ad, and a postcard from a car dealership that thinks I can be bought with 0% financing. Inside, I put the mason jar into a Ziploc, sealed it like I knew what I was doing, and slid it into an old cigar tin I'd kept for nails. The recorder went into the same tin. I put the tin in a paper bag with handles. I put that bag into another bag because once you've had one thing disappear from your trash double layers, start to feel less like paranoia and more like common sense. I called Linda. She answered on the second ring, voice small. "Frank, I'm going to the police," I said. "I have a sample and something else." "Robert resting," she said. "They've got him on a monitor. He keeps waking up and asking what day it is." I tell him and he nods like he's trying to decide if he believes me. "I'll call you after I meet with the detective," I said. "Tell him I'll stop by after if he wants to see an old face that isn't asking him to be strong." She laughed a single, breathless sound. "He likes being asked to be strong," she said. "But he likes you more." I locked up, checked the back door, checked the window latches again, and walked out to the truck. The paper bag sat on the passenger seat like a person. I buckled it in because habit is comfort when sense is scarce. On the way to the station, I turned the radio on without listening. People sang about things that sounded simple. It made me angry, and then it made me tired, and then it made me nothing. The station was cooler than the hospital somehow and smelled better. Reyes met me in a small office with a window that looked at a brick wall. He was younger than me by a lot, but older than a rookie with sharp eyes, a tie that had been straightened more than once today. He offered me water. I said yes because my mouth was dry and because people notice when you refuse everything they offer. He waited until I took a sip before he asked his first question. "Tell me about the whiskey." So I did. I gave him the dates, the words Ethan used, and the pause that didn't feel like surprise. I didn't give him my theories. I gave him the index cards of the facts and let him stack them however he wanted. Then I put the paper bag on his desk and took the tin out and opened it and set the mason jar and the recorder on his blotter like tools at the start of a job. He didn't touch them yet. He asked questions that sounded like small ones but weren't. Who else has keys to your house? When did you last check your trash? Did you mention the vial to anyone besides Gary? Then he lifted the recorder and weighed it in his hand, the way a man does when he's thinking about how heavy a word might be if you had to carry it. "You understand," he said, "this doesn't become a case because you and I both have a feeling. It becomes a case when what you've handed me can survive other people looking at it." "I do," I said. "I want other people to look at it." He nodded. "We'll send the liquid to the state lab. We'll make a copy of your audio. If there's cause, we'll move. If there isn't, we'll tell you exactly why we can't." "You okay with that?" "I am," I said, and meant it. I'm not in the business of wanting the wrong man punished. I'm in the business of wanting the right truth told. When I stood to leave, he said my name like he was picking it up to see how it felt. "Mr. Dalton." "Yes, don't speak to your son again until I tell you to. If he reaches out, note the time and what he says and keep your answers shorter than his questions." I nodded, surprised by the feeling that someone else was finally willing to carry a corner of the weight I'd been holding. Outside, the afternoon had gone a dull gray kind of bright, the kind that hurts your eyes more than it lights your way. I drove to the hospital. Linda was in the same chair and the same machines were singing their quiet electronic lullaby. Robert looked more like himself by degrees. His skin had a little color back and his mouth was less tense around the breath that came and went. I put my hand on the rail and his eyes cracked open. "You look like hell," he whispered. "You should see yourself," I said. And he smiled with just the left side of his mouth, the way men do when smiling takes too much of the rest of their face. "I heard you're making friends with the police," he said. "I'm trying to make sure they're on our side when they show up," I said. He closed his eyes again, nodded once, and drifted. I stood there longer than I needed to, listening to the machine keep him honest about his heartbeat. Linda whispered things that don't belong to anyone but them. I stepped out into the hall and called Gary to thank him for moving faster than I had any right to ask. He told me that's what friends were for and to watch my back. I told him I would. At home, the house had the gall to be exactly as I'd left it. The quiet sat in the rooms like a guest who refuses to go home. I made myself an omelet I didn't finish and washed the pan because some things you do just to prove to yourself you're still the same person who does them. I went to the hall closet, pulled down the fireproof box from the top shelf, and opened it on the kitchen table. It held the papers of a life birth certificates, the deed to the house, and Linda's rose gold wedding ring I haven't been ready to part with. I added a post-it to the inside lid whiskey sample with police. Do not discard. I don't know who the note was for. Maybe it was for me. I slept on the couch with the hall light on. I hadn't done that since the night after my heart attack, and my chest didn't like the way those two facts looked standing next to each other. I woke before dawn because the body remembers old alarms. I made coffee and didn't drink it. I listened to the house breathe. When the sun finally decided to show itself, I called Linda and told her I'd be by around noon. She said the doctor thought Robert would be moved out of the critical unit if his numbers kept behaving. Behaving is a word for toddlers and heartbeats. I liked the sound of it. By 10 a.m., the phone rang again. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail because I'd learned something important yesterday. You don't owe anyone an answer before you're ready to give it. The message came in after the second ring. I waited, then pressed play. Dad, it's me. Ethan's voice pulled tight like a wire. We need to talk. Sooner is better than later. He paused. Call me back. I didn't. I wrote down the time and the exact words and put the note in the fireproof box because sometimes you need to make your evidence. I looked out the window at my yard, which refuses to stay green no matter how much a man waters it. The porch swing creaked once. No wind I could see. The day was too quiet again. If you want me to say I wasn't afraid, I won't. Fear isn't a thing I hide from anymore. It belongs to the truth the way nails belong to wood. They hold it together. I stood there in the kitchen with my hand on the back of a chair and knew this much without writing it down. Whatever this was, it had passed the point where a father and a son could fix it at a table by talking slower and gentler than the last time. It had passed the point where a bottle was just a gift and a hospital was just a place that happens to other people. It was going to get worse before it got better. And I was going to keep walking toward it, one room, one phone call, one steady breath at a time. There's a kind of silence that doesn't sit still. It paces, it taps the edge of your coffee mug, it watches the phone on the counter and counts to 60 with you, then starts over. Detective Reyes told me not to talk to my son, so I didn't call Ethan back. I wrote down the time of his voicemail like it was a license plate I needed to remember in the morning. I did exactly what the detective asked, and still the house felt watched. I left the phone on the hallway table and walked the rooms with my hands behind my back, not because I expected to find anything, but because men like me don't sit when we can stand, don't rest when there's a job undone. The October light came in thinner today. A white sheet hung over the sun. I checked the back door, the window latches and the garage side entrance with the stubborn lock you have to lift while you turn. All fine. All normal. Normal is not the same as safe. I made a second pot of coffee. I didn't drink it and opened the fireproof box on the kitchen table. Inside the deed, a stack of insurance forms, Linda's ring, the index card where I'd copied the exact words from Ethan's message. I added another card, Detective Reyes, 2:30 p.m., underlined twice. All morning I'd been holding off on calling the station back, not because I was hesitant, but because I wanted to show up with a day's worth of steadiness in me. Before I left, I took one more slow circle of the house. In the front hall, I stopped, the deadbolt aligned with the strike plate, just a fraction off a new scuff at the lip of the metal round, and light the way a key that isn't perfectly cut will rub after a few uses. Nothing broken, nothing forced. Just a mark you only notice if you know the door like you know the bones in your hand. A thought parked itself in my chest and did not move. Someone had let themselves in. I went to the junk drawer and found a short length of thread and a piece of clear tape. I laid the thread across the bottom of the door frame and marked it with tape so it would stay put, a trick I'd learned from a corporal who'd been tired of finding his locker rifled through. You don't trap a thief, you tell a story about whether he's been there. When I slid into the truck, the house looked empty and harmless, which is exactly how a house ought to look. I backed out anyway, like I was leaving a sleeping animal behind. St. Luke's is 3 turns and a long straight from the station, so I carried the hospital in my bones while I walked the hall to Detective Reyes's office. He has one of those rooms they give the middle rank, small window, big desk stacks of files that look like they grow in the dark. He stood to shake my hand and pointed me to a chair. He didn't look like a man who'd stayed up too late or a man who'd slept too well. He looked like a man who knew what to do with a clean fact. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Dalton," he said, "and for the samples yesterday. We've sent them to the state lab. Your friend Gary's preliminary results match what we saw. We're treating this seriously." "I assume seriously has levels," I said. He almost smiled. "It does. Right now it means we're gathering corroboration. The hospital's tox panel, your audio, the chain of custody on your sample." He slid a legal pad toward me. "I want your timeline in your own words. When you received the package, when you gave it to Mr. Carson, when your son called, when you discovered the vial was missing." I told him straight, watching his pen move. He didn't interrupt except to check a time or a day. When I finished, he tapped the pad with the side of the pen and leaned back. "You said the trash bag had been disturbed, turned around the wrong way. I didn't move it. Any sign of forced entry, no. Anyone else with keys, no spares hidden. No one I've given one to recently. My late wife had hers. My son had one when he was younger. When's the last time you saw it in his possession?" The answer wanted to be a lifetime ago, but the truth walked in wearing a hospital gown 5 years back after the heart attack when Ethan had come by the house to grab a few things for me before I was discharged. He'd brought a bag with slippers, sweatpants, and my phone charger. At the time, I told him thank you for the small mercy of remembering the charger. I didn't ask him for my keys. I assumed I'd left them on the kitchen counter. After my heart attack, I said slowly, he had them then. I don't recall him handing them back to me. Reyes nodded, neither surprised nor pleased. "If someone entered without force, that helps explain the missing vial. Did anyone else know about the vial, just Gary? I'll ask him to document his conversation with you just to show we're not inventing a thing after the fact." He flipped the pad closed. "Mr. Dalton, I'm going to say this plainly. Don't meet your son. If he invites you anywhere, let me know. If he shows up, call us. I don't think he's interested in a conversation." I thought of Ethan's voice on my voicemail, wound tight like a cable under a car hood you shouldn't touch while the engine's hot. "I'll do exactly what you say." He slid a card across the desk. "My cell. If you sense something is off, call. I'd rather be wrong twice than right too late." "I appreciate that," I said, standing. He did too. On the way out, the building smelled like copier toner and floor wax. I took the stairs down 2 flights and stopped on the landing to breathe. I wasn't out of breath. I was checking that the ground under me was still the same ground I'd walked on when I came in. Linda's call came as I was pulling into the hospital's garage. I answered on the second ring. "Frank." "He's better," she said, tears in her words. "They're moving him out of critical to a step-down unit. He keeps apologizing every time he wakes up like he thinks he ruined someone's party." "It'll be a party when he's home," I said. "Can I stop by, please?" Robert looked color-washed but solid, propped up now, eyes clearer. He reached for my forearm when I came in that old working man's handshake where you anchor each other past the wrist. "You look worse today," he said, which made Linda laugh through the tissue she held at her chin. "I brought my worst for a visit," I said, pulling the chair up. "I'll bring my better tomorrow." Linda excused herself to speak with a nurse. When the curtain swished closed, Robert lowered his voice. "Frank, between us." He glanced at the door, then back. "You think Ethan did this? I think that bottle wasn't a gift." He watched my face like he was learning a language from it. "You going to be all right handling that? I'm going to be lawful," I said. "I'm going to be steady." "That's not what I asked." I let the question sit long enough to tell him I'd heard it. "I'm going to be all right handling it." He squeezed my forearm once, then let go. Men like us don't hug unless we're burying someone. The squeeze is the permission slip to feel without the paperwork. The curtain opened and Linda returned with a younger woman at her side, mid-30s, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, eyes rimmed tired but sharp. I recognized her from photos on the mantel at Ethan's Laya. My daughter-in-law. We'd spoken twice since the wedding, politely like neighbors who live 2 blocks apart. "Frank," she said, I'm glad you're here." I stood. "How are you holding up?" She glanced at Robert. Scared. Angry. Mostly scared. Her voice lowered. "We need to talk." Linda stroked Robert's hand and said, "I'll give you 2 a minute," and stepped into the hall. A woman who understands when a conversation needs privacy, even if she isn't the one who asked for it. Laya gestured toward the little family lounge around the corner. It had a coffee machine that made everything taste like plastic and 2 chairs with backs too straight to be kind. She didn't sit. I didn't either. "I don't know what you know," she said, "but I know Ethan has been different for a long time. Distant, secretive. He keeps jars on a shelf in the garage, dried plants. He says it's for a hobby. He's joined online groups about herbal extraction. I didn't think..." She swallowed. "I didn't think it connected to anything like this." "White snake root," I said. "Have you heard that name?" Her eyes flicked recognition or fear or both. "Yes, I've seen it in his search history. I thought he was reading, that's all. Detective Reyes will want to talk to you, if you're willing." She nodded too fast. "I already called. I left a message." "Good," I said. Relief and grief are cousins. I felt one visiting on behalf of the other. "Laya, if you have anything, screenshots, messages, photographs of those jars, keep them. Let the detective pull the thread." She looked at me hard enough to see me. "Why would he do this to you?" I could have said a dozen things. Money I wouldn't give him, love I didn't give the way he wanted it, disappointments that grew hooks. Instead, I told the truth the way I knew it. Because if he can't own the story, he'll burn the page. She flinched like the words were a draft. "He asked me this morning if I'd heard from you," she said. "He wanted to know if you liked the bottle." "What did you tell him, that you'd given it to my father?" We stood there for a few seconds with that sentence between us, the kind of thing that changes shape as you look at it. "Thank you," I said, "for telling me." "I'm sorry," she said, and I knew she meant all of it, not just the piece she'd spoken aloud. We went back to Robert's room and said gentler things about the weather and football and the kind of soup the cafeteria tries to call chicken noodle. I left when the nurse came to check his monitors, promising to bring magazines and pretending that mattered to the outcome. On the way home, I stopped at the hardware store. I bought 2 new deadbolts and a package of those little stick-on alarms that scream if a door opens when they're set. The clerk rang me up and made a comment about winter coming early. I said something about needing to get ahead of it. He bagged the locks like they were groceries and told me to have a good day. We say that to each other. Have a good day, if the day will listen. At home, the thread I'd taped across the doorframe was exactly where I'd put it. Intact. I stepped over it and closed the door behind me with a soft click. I'd thought about calling a locksmith, but putting in the deadbolts myself felt like making my bed in a strange motel. If I do it, maybe I can lie my head down without all the noise. I installed the first lock on the back door, then the second on the front, screwing the plates in slowly and firmly, the muscles in my forearms familiar with the angle and the push. The little alarms went on the door frames with a sound like a bandage peeling off. I set them and opened the door to hear the shrill proof they'd work. They did. Good. By the time I finished, the sun had dropped enough to pull long shadows across the floor. I heated a can of soup and ate it standing up with the bowl cupped in my left hand and the spoon in my right. Old habits. Less to wash that way. The phone buzzed on the hallway table. I didn't jump. I walked to it at the speed of a man going to answer his door. Unknown number again. I let it buzz. It stopped. Seconds later, a text appeared. Ethan, we need to talk face to face. Today. A second text followed before I could think about the first. Ethan, don't make this worse than it is. I put the phone down like it might burn me. I wrote the time and the texts exactly as they'd come in on an index card and added the card to the fireproof box. Then I took Detective Reyes's card from my wallet and dialed. He picked up on the second ring. Reyes, it's Dalton, I said. He's asking to meet. Do not. He said the two words clean as a gate closing. Forward me the texts. I'll log them. If he calls, let it go to voicemail. He left one earlier. I've transcribed it. Good. Keep doing that. I hesitated. Detective, would you come by and take a look at my front door? I think someone's used a key that wasn't mine. I can send an officer to photograph and document. I'll come by if I'm clear in the next hour. He arrived 40 minutes later with a young uniform named Patel. They photographed the strike plate, the tiny scuff where the key had scraped the thread taped low like a trip line. Reyes didn't make a face. He doesn't look like a man who enjoys being right, but he also doesn't waste energy pretending he's surprised when he isn't. Do you have the original set of keys? He asked. I went to the hall closet and pulled down the small tin where we'd kept extras 20 years ago. Inside, two brass keys marked front and back, in my wife's neat lettering, a male key and a key that shouldn't have been there, a copy with no marks cut a hair off center, so it sat awkwardly in the tin. My stomach cooled. This wasn't ours, I said. We never labeled it. We label everything. Reyes had Patel bag it. We'll see if we can pull prints, he said. No promises. Keys aren't friendly to fingerprints. Do what you can, I said. I'd like every little thing in this story to stop pretending it's not connected to the rest. When they left, the house felt different. Not safer, not less watched, just witnessed. There's a thing that happens when the official world steps into your private one. The ground tilts and then rights itself at a new angle. I sat at the kitchen table and held my coffee mug with both hands, though it was empty. The porch swing creaked. No wind I could see. I listened for footsteps that weren't there. I set the phone to Do Not Disturb and put it face down. When I was a boy, I thought adulthood meant no one could tell me what to do. Now it means I've learned who to listen to. Around 9, a car idled outside long enough that I got up and walked to the window. Headlights washed over the porch and then slid on. I stayed by the window until I heard the sound fade. It might have been nothing, a teenager lost a delivery driver checking an address. It felt like something that wanted to see if I'd twitch. I didn't sleep. I lay on the couch with the hall light on and my boots by the door. I'm too old for heroics. I'm not too old to be ready. Just before dawn, the phone buzzed again. Voicemail, no ring. I'd forgotten the Do Not Disturb. I played it with the volume low. Dad. You're making a mess of this. Ethan's voice said quieter than before, like he was in a place where he didn't want the walls to hear him. You went to the cops. That's not smart. We could have handled this. You're not thinking straight. He hung up. I wrote it down. We could have handled this. Loaded words. Handled what? At 8 sharp, Reyes called. State lab came back preliminary, he said. Independent confirmation of white snake root in your sample. It's enough to formally open a case and request medical records from the hospital for Mr. Carson. We're moving. I let out a breath that had been living in me since Gary said the word snake root and hadn't made a plan for exiting. Tell me what you need. Keep doing what you're doing, document. Do not engage, lock your doors. I'll be in touch for a formal statement under recording. If your son reaches out, save everything. If he shows up, call 911. I mean that. I know you do, I said. Detective, yes, thank you. He didn't say you're welcome. He said, we'll do our jobs, which from a man like him is the same thing. I showered, shaved, and put on a clean shirt. There's a way a man needs to look when the day is going to require steadiness. I made breakfast and ate it at the table like each bite could be a choice I got right. I drove to the hospital with a stack of magazines under my arm, hunting home repair, a glossy one with gardens that would never grow in Missouri clay. Robert was awake enough to pretend to be interested in an article about chainsaw safety. We both knew he was humoring me. The pretense was a kindness. Laia came in halfway through an article about deck maintenance. She had her phone in her hand and a look like a person who hadn't slept in a bed only near one. "Detective Reyes called me," she said. "He wants me to bring in Ethan's old laptop. I still have it from before we got married." "Bring it," I said. "Let the law carry what it's made to carry." She nodded. "Frank, he texted me," she said, eyes down. "He asked if you were playing hero. He said if anything happens, it's on you." She lifted her eyes. I forwarded it to Reyes. "Good," I said. A heat rose in my chest that wasn't the old kind. It was the kind that knows the difference between a threat and a warning. You don't answer anything he sends. Not one word. Not even to tell him you won't be answering. When I left, the light outside had the weak honesty of midday. I drove home the long way, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to put more road between me and the next thing. The thread at the door was still unbroken. I stepped over it like it was a line I could honor and closed the door behind me. I sat with a pen and a yellow pad and wrote, "What does he want?" in letters big enough to cross the page. Under it, I made 2 columns again. Money, control. Under money, I wrote last winter, 20,000, refused. Under control, I wrote bottle, placement, missing vial, calls, we need to talk. Control was the heavier side of the scale. Money is a reason. Control is a habit. Habits last longer. At noon, the door alarm chirped its high scream. I was halfway out of my chair and had the phone in my hand before my brain could tell my body it had overreacted. The chirp came again, the cheap little device proving it could do what I bought it for. I moved to the side of the window out of sight and pulled the curtain back a finger's width. A delivery truck. The driver had opened the storm door to leave a padded envelope on the mat. He glanced at the alarm, shrugged like a man who had encountered 1,000 worse noises, and stepped back. The door eased shut. The alarm went quiet. I let my heart come back to where it belongs, and waited. When the truck pulled away, I opened the door. The envelope had no return address. Inside, a single sheet of printer paper. No note. Just a photograph printed off a phone my porch last night at an angle from across the street. The porch swing was still. The light over the door glowed. No person in the frame. The photo had been taken within the last 12 hours. I looked at the street, at the neighbor's hedges, at the spot near the corner where a car could sit with its lights off and see what it wanted. Then I walked the photograph to the fireproof box, added it to the stack, and called Reyes. He answered on the first ring. I told him what came, how it came, what it showed. "Do not throw that away," he said. "I'll send someone." "You're going to get tired of hearing from me," I said. "I'd prefer that to the alternative," he said, and hung up to make it less a conversation and more a task. I stood at the window and watched the street from the side, the way you watch a wild thing you don't want to spook. The porch swing moved once. No wind. Houses are funny that way. What you think is still is always telling you otherwise if you want to see it. By late afternoon, the police had the photograph and my statement about how it arrived. They took the envelope too. Reyes texted, "We're filing preservation requests for camera footage on your block." Practical words. The kind that lays track. Evening came on like a slow closing door. I heated last night's soup and ate it sitting on the back steps, the October air cutting clean in my lungs. The yard darkened, the swing stayed still, and somewhere far off a dog barked at something only dogs can see. I went inside and turned on the hall light. The phone buzzed one more time. "Ethan, you think they'll keep you safe from what you started? call me. I did not. I copied it word for word and slid the paper into the box. The box closed with the soft, final sound it always makes. I set it back on the highest shelf the way a man sets a weight where he can't trip over it in the dark. I stood there and listened to the house talk to itself, the settle and sigh of wood, the thin whine of the refrigerator motor, the tick and tock of a clock that has no idea what time means. I thought about the first time Ethan said Dad in a way that made my heart want to stand up and salute, and the last time he said Dad in a way that made it want to sit down. It was full dark when I finally stretched out on the couch. I put my hand flat on my chest and felt my heart working slow, steady, professional. A long time ago, a doctor told me I'd know if I was in trouble. Tonight it felt like the most honest thing I owned. I don't know if sleep came or if the night just decided to have mercy. But when the phone rang at 6:12 a.m., I was ready. I answered on the first ring. Mr. Dalton Reyes said no hello. State lab confirmed. We're filing for a warrant. I closed my eyes and saw the porch swing the white thread across the threshold, the photograph of my own house from across the street. I saw a bottle catching the morning light like it was shame in a glass. "Where do you need me?" I asked. "Right where you are," he said. "And whatever happens next, don't open the door unless the person on the other side can prove they're here to help." The line went quiet. The house listened. And I stood in the little country I'd built inside my walls and waited for the day to step over the threshold. They say the knock you don't expect is the one you remember. But this time I was expecting it. I'd been expecting it since the moment Reyes told me the lab had confirmed the poison. Still, when the rap came sharp and deliberate, my chest tightened. Not from fear, from knowing the line we'd been walking in the dark was about to be painted in bright official ink. That sound meant the warrant had teeth now, and the day wasn't going to wait for me to feel ready. It was just after 8 a.m. The light outside had that thin gold that barely touches the ground before it slips away. I opened the door to find Reyes standing with two uniforms, Patel from before, and another officer I didn't know young enough that his belt still looked too big for him. They were dressed for work that wasn't going to stay on paper. "Morning, Mr. Dalton," Reyes said, holding up a folded document in a clear plastic sleeve. "Judge signed off at 7:43. We have authority to search your son's residence and seize any items relevant to the case." He didn't have to say it. This was the step where everything could turn. "Do you need me there?" I asked. "No," he said. "And that's not a request, it's an instruction. We don't want you in his line of sight today. We'll handle the search. If we find what we think we'll find, we'll proceed accordingly." Proceed accordingly is cop language for your life might not look the same by dinner. Patel glanced past me toward the interior hallway. "Any changes overnight? The thread's still there. No alarms triggered." Reyes gave a short nod. "Good. Keep them set. I'll have one of our techs install a proper camera system before the week's out." They left in a convoy, a black sedan, a marked cruiser, rolling down the street like a line of punctuation headed for an unfinished sentence. I stood in the doorway until they turned the corner. Then I closed the door and looked at the thread at the bottom of the frame, still perfectly still, as if daring someone to disturb it. The hours after they left were the kind that stretch. I tried reading. The words sat on the page like strangers at a bus stop. I made coffee I didn't drink. Around 11, I took a slow drive toward the edge of town, stopping at the little Veterans Memorial Park where the benches face a fountain that hasn't run since last summer. The sound of traffic from Main Street was faint enough here to let the air settle. I'd been here once with Ethan when he was 10. We'd brought bread for the ducks. He'd asked me what all the names on the plaques were for. I told him they were for men and women who'd done their jobs to the end. He asked if that meant they'd finished the mission. I said yes. He didn't ask me what the mission was. Sometimes I think that's the part I should have explained. By 1 o'clock, I was back home sitting at the kitchen table with the phone face up. I wasn't expecting him to call me. Ethan's not the call when you're cornered type. He's the type to show up unannounced, force the conversation onto his terms. That's what had Reyes worried. At 1:17, the phone buzzed. Not a call, a text. From Laya. Laya, they're here. There. I'm in the bedroom with the door shut. I can hear them going through the garage. Me. Stay inside. Don't interfere. You're safe with them there. No reply came back. I pictured her sitting on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, listening to boots on concrete and the sound of cardboard boxes being moved. I knew that sound. It's the sound of someone looking for the truth without caring if they wake the house. At 2:04, Reyes called. We found it. I let the words land. Found what 3 mason jars labeled with masking tape, WSR, rootstock, and tincture. 2 of them contain dried plant material consistent with white snake root. The third contains liquid. We'll send it to the lab for confirmation. We also found handwritten notes on preparation methods, dosage estimates, and... He paused. And what an envelope addressed to you. Unsealed. Inside a short letter, your name at the top, the words, "You'll understand why when it's over," at the bottom. Nothing in between but a drawing of a tree with its roots circled. The kitchen felt colder. He left me a message in case the bottle worked. That's what it looks like, Reyes said, voice even. We'll log it, bag it, and photograph everything. Leia is cooperating fully. She's given consent to search shared digital devices. Do you have him in custody? Not yet. He wasn't home when we arrived. We're putting out a locate. I gripped the phone tighter. Detective, if he comes here, call 911 immediately. I've already flagged your address for priority response. Don't engage him. The line went quiet for a beat. Then he said, We're moving from suspicion to evidence, Mr. Dalton. That changes the game. I understand. I hung up and went to the fireproof box. I added a card, 2:04 p.m. Reyes called, found Jar's notes letter. I read the other cards in the stack one by one, like flipping through a manual for a machine you can't take apart. Each entry was its piece of proof that the last month hadn't been a fever dream. Around 3:30, I called Linda to update her. Robert was asleep. She listened without interrupting the way she had when I'd called from the ER years ago after my heart attack. Frank, she said when I finished, this is going to end in one of 2 ways. He'll be arrested or he'll run. He won't run far, I said. No, but far enough to make you wonder. At 4:12, the door alarm shrieked. I was in the hallway in 3 steps, phone in hand. The front door was shut, the thread across the frame unbroken. The sound had come from the back. I moved slow, not because I was afraid, but because you don't rush when you need to see everything. Through the kitchen window, I saw the screen door swing once, twice, then go still. No one in sight. I stepped closer and spotted a folded sheet of paper wedged between the handle and the frame. I opened the door, disarmed the alarm, and pulled the paper free. 1 sentence in thick black marker. Stop letting them in, or I will. No signature, no envelope. Just those words. I took a photograph, slipped the paper into a plastic sleeve, and called Reyes. He said an officer would be by within 15 minutes. Patel arrived in 10, photographed the note in my hand, the spot on the door, the hinges, and the yard beyond. You see anyone, I asked. No movement on the street, he said. Could have been dropped and run. He left with the note, promising to log it immediately. That evening I didn't bother with the couch. I set a chair in the corner of the living room where I could see both the front and back doors. The house smelled faintly of metal from the new locks. I kept the lights on, not because I wanted to see out, but because I wanted anyone outside to see me. At 9:45, my phone lit up. Unknown number. I let it ring to voicemail. A minute later, I played it. Dad, it's me. They're making a mistake. Those things they found, they're not what they think. You know me better than that. A pause. Call me, please. The voice was calm, measured, almost gentle. The kind of tone you'd use to sell someone something they didn't want to buy. I didn't call back. I wrote it down word for word. Morning brought a sharp frost. The grass was white at the tips and the air tasted like coins. Reyes texted at 8:12. "We have him. Brought in without incident. Will update." I stared at the words until they stopped being shapes and started being facts. I drove to the station just before noon. The waiting area was small with 2 plastic chairs against one wall and a vending machine humming in the corner. Reyes came out to meet me. "He's not talking," he said. "Asked for a lawyer right away. That's fine, we've got enough to hold him." Lias provided substantial digital evidence. Emails referencing route prep and perfect timing. Search history for toxicity levels in adults over 60. What happens now? We'll present charges to the prosecutor: attempted murder, possession of a controlled toxic substance, tampering with evidence. It'll move fast. I nodded. My hands stayed in my pockets so they wouldn't do anything they shouldn't. Reyes studied me for a moment. "You holding up?" "I'm standing," I said. "That's enough." When I left the station, the sky had gone that dull pewter color that makes you think snow's coming even if the forecast swears otherwise. I drove without a destination, passing the old mill, the shuttered hardware store, the diner that still smelled like grease from 20 years ago. I ended up at the hospital. Robert was awake, watching a game show on mute. Linda sat beside him, knitting something green. "They got him," I said quietly. Robert nodded once. "Good." Linda's needles kept moving. "What now?" "Now," I said, "we wait for the rest to do its work." That night I sat on the back steps with a mug of tea, steam rising into the cold. The yard was quiet except for the occasional crack of a branch in the wind. Somewhere down the block a dog barked once, then stopped. I thought about the note on the door, the jars in the garage, the letter with the tree roots. And I thought about the boy with the bread at the memorial fountain, asking if the names meant they'd finished the mission. Maybe this was my mission, not to finish it, but to make sure it didn't finish me. When I went inside, I checked the thread on the door. Still there. Still telling the truth. Poison is an ugly word. It doesn't just sit in your mouth. It changes the way you breathe. Reyes didn't say it right away. He let Gary explain first, maybe because he knew hearing it from a friend would land softer than hearing it from a detective. But there's no soft way to hear that something meant to kill you was already inside a man you respect, and that you'd been the one to hand it to him. It started 2 mornings after Robert's first collapse. I was in the kitchen making oatmeal I didn't plan on eating when the phone rang. Gary's voice was low controlled. "Frank, you sitting down?" I eased into the chair by the table, eyes on the clock. "I'm down. Talk to me." I ran the tests twice. Thought the first might have been contaminated, but it wasn't. There's white snake root extract in that whiskey, enough to send someone with heart issues straight to the ICU. "You said Robert's got a pacemaker, right?" "Yeah," I said. My mouth was dry. "And I've got my bum ticker, you know that. That's why I'm calling you before I call Reyes. This isn't accidental, Frank. The levels are too precise. Somebody knew exactly what they were doing." I let that sit. The hum of the refrigerator sounded like a warning tone. "Go ahead and call him. He needs to know now. I'll send him the report. Keep your phone close." The moment I hung up, I looked at the fireproof box in the corner of the living room. I'd been keeping the little things, dates, copies of texts, photos of the box, and now the plastic vial with the whiskey sample. I took out a fresh card. Gary confirmed poison. 8:43 a.m. Call to Reyes pending. Wrote it slow, each word a nail. By the time I put the pen down, the phone was ringing again. Reyes. "Mr. Dalton, I just got off with Gary. I'm on my way to your place now. We're going to need the original bottle, any packaging, and your statement. You comfortable with me taking it into evidence? I don't want it in my house another minute," I said. He arrived in under 15 minutes alone this time. He wore plain clothes, a dark jacket and jeans, but the badge was still on his belt. "Where is it?" he asked, not even sitting. I pointed to the cabinet where I'd kept it since the day it arrived. He put on gloves, lifted the bottle with both hands like it was an unexploded shell. "You haven't opened it, no. Didn't even crack the seal. Figured I'd give it to Robert and let him decide." Reyes inspected the label, the wax top, and the engraved serial number. These limited editions are often tracked through distributors. If Ethan bought it himself, we might be able to follow the paper trail. If he had someone else get it... He trailed off, eyes narrowing. That someone's as guilty as he is, I finished. We sat at the table while I went over everything: Ethan's gift, the handwriting, and my decision to pass it to Robert. I told him about the last words Ethan had said to me before the silence. One day you'll regret siding with him over me. Reyes wrote it down verbatim. That's important. Shows motive resentment. Motive's not new, I said. Method is. Later that afternoon I went to see Robert. He was sitting up, pale but alert, the TV on low. Linda was by his side, knitting something dark blue. They found something in the whiskey, I told him quietly. Robert's brows pulled together. Like bad storage, like poison, I said. White snake root. Gary tested it twice. Linda's hands froze mid-stitch. Frank, I'm sorry, I said. I didn't know. God help me, I didn't know. Robert shook his head. Don't blame yourself. You didn't pour it in there. No, I said, but I put it in your hands. Driving home that evening, the weight in my chest wasn't just from my heart condition. It was knowing that every mile I drove was a mile closer to whatever came next. Ethan had crossed a line you don't uncross, not just with me, but with his own wife's father. At a red light, I caught myself gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I thought about the day he was born, the first time he'd wrapped his tiny hand around my finger, and I thought about the hand that had written those cold words on the package. The next day, Gary called again. Frank. I dug a little deeper. White snake root isn't exactly common in bulk. There are agricultural controls. Someone had to grow it or get it from a controlled source, so not just some wild plant he picked off the side of the road. Nope. And the way it was processed, extracted, reduced, blended into the whiskey, it's careful work. Like someone was testing how much they could use without changing the taste. That detail chilled me more than anything. Testing meant practice, and practice meant intent. Reyes came by in the evening with an update. We've got probable cause to get a search warrant for Ethan's property, garage shed, and any storage units. The judge will need the lab confirmation from our team, but Gary's report gets us most of the way. Do it fast, I said. He's not the type to wait around if he smells trouble. Reyes studied me. Mr. Dalton, when this moves forward, it's going to get ugly. Are you ready for that? I thought about Robert's pale face, the monitors beeping beside his bed. Ugly's already here. That night the house felt too quiet. I double-checked the locks, the thread I'd strung low across the inside of the front door frame, and the motion sensor light in the back. A habit from my service days: always know if someone's been where they shouldn't. I sat at the kitchen table with the fireproof box open, reading through my cards like chapters. Each one was its piece of the story. I wondered what the last card would say. Just after midnight, a noise woke me, a soft clink like glass on wood. I got up, moved to the living room. Through the front door's frosted pane, I saw a shadow moving away down the steps. By the time I opened the door, the street was empty. At my feet was a small square box wrapped in brown paper. No ribbon this time. No note. I didn't touch it. Called Reyes instead. He told me to step away, wait for an officer. When Patel arrived, he crouched to inspect it, then whistled low. Feels like another bottle, he said. Another whiskey. He nodded. Could be something else. They took it without opening it in front of me. The next day, Reyes confirmed it wasn't whiskey, just an empty decanter. But inside, where liquid should have been, was a folded piece of paper with 2 words. Next time. That was the moment the case stopped being about evidence alone. It was about time. How much of it did we have before he tried again? The morning after, Reyes called early. Judge signed the warrant. We're serving it tomorrow morning. I want you to stay put, keep your head down. Not my first rodeo, I said. Maybe not, but it might be your last if you're not careful. That day dragged like a bad leg. I kept myself busy fixing a loose hinge on the back gate, tightening the screws on the porch rail. Busy work just to keep from staring at the road waiting for a truck I recognized. Around 5, Linda called. "Robert's coming home tomorrow. Doctor says he's stable." That bit of good news didn't lighten me much. If anything, it made me more aware of what we'd almost lost. By nightfall, I'd set out a fresh card for the box warrant signed. Search tomorrow. I sat in the chair by the front window watching the last of the light drain from the street. The lamppost flickered on. Somewhere a dog barked twice and fell silent. I thought about the word Gary had used, precise. About how someone can use precision for building or breaking, and how my son had chosen the latter. I didn't sleep much. Every sound seemed louder. Every shadow seemed closer. When the first light came, I poured coffee I didn't drink, sat at the table and waited for the phone to ring. It rang at 7:43. "Reyes, we're rolling." And with that, part 5 ended, not with an answer, but with the sharp intake of breath before one. They say you can't prepare yourself to see your child in handcuffs. I wasn't seeing it yet, but I knew it was coming. What you can prepare for is the silence, the moment when the truth starts climbing out of the dark corners and you realize it's not going back in. At 7:43 a.m., Reyes had said, "We're rolling." By 8:15, I was sitting 2 blocks from Ethan's house, watching from behind the cracked windshield of my old Ford as the black and whites pulled up in front of his driveway. I hadn't told Reyes I'd be there. He'd have told me to stay home. But there's a difference between being warned and being scared off. This was my fight too, even if I wasn't holding the warrant. Ethan's place sat on a corner lot, the kind of suburban box with vinyl siding and a lawn too perfect to be natural. I watched as 2 officers approached the door, Reyes right behind them. One knocked. A long pause. Then the door opened, and there he was, my son, wearing a faded St. Louis Cardinals t-shirt and a face I barely recognized. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the stiff way he crossed his arms, the half-step back when Reyes held up the paper. The officers entered and Ethan followed, jaw tight. I stayed in the truck engine off, hands on the wheel. The minutes stretched. I imagined the sound of drawers opening, boxes sliding across shelves, the rustle of paper. I'd been in enough searches during my service years to know the rhythm, quick sweep, then slow sift. My phone buzzed. A text from Reyes. "Found something. Will update." That something came into view 20 minutes later when an officer carried a plastic evidence bag to the patrol car. Even from where I sat, I could see the label, same brand, same cereal style as the whiskey Ethan had sent me. Only this one was half empty. I didn't move, didn't breathe almost, because finding that bottle wasn't the end, it was the beginning of the end. At 9:05, Reyes stepped outside, scanned the street, and spotted my truck. He walked over, leaned down to the open window. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Too late for that. What did you find?" "A couple more bottles from the same batch. One open, one sealed. We'll get them tested, but there's residue in the open one, white powder. Faint, same as what Gary found." I swallowed hard. "That's enough. It's enough to push this forward." "But Frank," he hesitated. "We also found a notebook. Handwritten, coded in parts. Gary might be able to help us with it, but from what I skimmed it reads like dosage notes. Trials." The word trials landed heavily. So Robert wasn't the first Reyes didn't answer. He didn't have to. I sat back, eyes on the house. Inside somewhere was the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager I'd driven to his first job, the young man I'd stood beside when he married Leia. And now? Now there was a man who kept dosage notes. A man who could have been the reason Robert nearly died. Reyes's radio crackled. He straightened. "They're bringing him out. You sure you want to see this?" "I've already seen enough," I said. But I didn't drive away. The front door opened. Ethan stepped out flanked by two officers. His wrists were cuffed in front of him, his chin, high eyes cold. He scanned the street until they landed on me. Our eyes locked. No words, no nod. Just that stare, the kind you give someone you once knew, but no longer claim. They put him in the back of the cruiser. I stayed put until the car pulled away, the reflection of the morning sun catching on the glass. Reyes came back over. He's going downtown. We'll book him, start the interview. He'll probably lawyer up. I know, I said. What about the notebook? I'll get it copied before it goes into full evidence. If you're up for it, you can look, see if any of the dates match something you remember. That afternoon at the station, Reyes laid the notebook on the table between us. The handwriting was Ethan's unmistakable loops on the G, the way he pressed hard enough to dent the page. Some entries were dated with numbers beside them. Others were symbols, a triangle, a/an asterisk. Gary joined us via speakerphone, his voice crackling through the line. That triangle, that's shorthand for half dose in some veterinary circles. And the asterisk usually means observe for delayed effect. I flipped to a page dated 6 months ago. Next to the date was a single word test, then a triangle, then RC. My stomach turned. RC, Robert Carson. Reyes wrote it down. So he's been thinking about this for months. 2 pages later, I saw another set of initials, FD, my own. Next to it, no triangle, no half dose. Just a solid number bigger than the rest. Gary's voice was quiet. That's a lethal dose, Frank. For a moment, the room tilted. I steadied myself with a hand on the table. So Robert wasn't the only target. No, Reyes said. You were the other. I drove home in silence. The notebook's images burned into my mind. Every meal, every drink I'd had in the last year replayed in my head, looking for moments he could have acted. I thought of that whiskey bottle sitting in my cabinet for days before I gave it to Robert. I thought about what would have happened if I'd decided to drink just 1 glass for old time's sake. By evening, the local news had it. Local man arrested in alleged poisoning attempt. They didn't use Ethan's name yet, but the description was enough for anyone who knew us to fill in the blanks. Linda called. The neighbors are talking. Robert's furious, says if Ethan shows his face at the house again, he'll... She trailed off. You okay? Not really. But I'm not dead. That's something. That night I opened the fireproof box again, added a new card, FD initials in notebook, lethal dose, slid it in next to the others. The box was getting full. I sat on the porch, the air heavy with summer heat, thinking about the difference between justice and closure. Justice can come in a courtroom. Closure, that's trickier. 2 days later, Reyes called early. Frank, his lawyer's angling for a deal. Claims Ethan didn't know the whiskey was tainted, that he bought it from a friend and didn't check it. But with the notebook, that's a hard sell. What happens if he pleads out lighter sentence, maybe no trial? But it's still prison time. Question is, do you want to see him in court? I looked out at the street, the same one Ethan had learned to ride his bike on, and thought about the weight of my answer. They say every man has a line he won't cross. I used to think mine was family. No matter what Ethan did, I told myself I'd never push him so far he couldn't find his way back. But that was before the whiskey, before Robert in a hospital bed, before I found my initials in that notebook, next to a number that meant you don't wake up. Now the line felt like a chalk mark in the rain, fading fast. The morning after Reyes called, I didn't get out of bed right away. The ceiling fan ticked slowly overhead, and my mind kept circling the same thought. If I say yes to a trial, I'll be the man who put his son in prison for a long, long time. If I say no, I'll be the man who let him walk after trying to kill me. Either way, there's no going back. By 9 a.m., I was at the station. Reyes was in the interview room leaning over a stack of papers. Across from him sat Ethan's lawyer, a wiry man with silver hair and an expression like he'd already won. Ethan wasn't there. They'd kept him in holding. Reyes waved me in. Frank, this is Mr. Caldwell. Caldwell stood, shook my hand, his grip dry and calculated. Mr. Dalton, I appreciate you coming in. I think we can resolve this in a way that spares everyone the... unpleasantness of a trial. I sat. You mean in a way that spares Ethan? His smile didn't flinch. He's prepared to admit to mishandling the bottle carelessness, not malice. In exchange, reduced charges. No attempted murder. He'd serve some time, but not much. And the notebook, I asked. An exercise in paranoia, Caldwell said smoothly. Our position is that it's fiction scribbles, nothing more. I looked at Reyes. He didn't say a word, but his jaw tightened. I leaned back. Do you know what it's like to read your initials next to a lethal dose, Mr. Caldwell? To see that written by the kid you taught to fish, the one you drove across the state so he could try out for his first baseball team. For the first time, Caldwell's gaze dropped. We're talking about avoiding a public spectacle, Mr. Dalton. I let the silence stretch. The ticking wall clock felt louder. Finally, I said, I'll think about it. And I walked out. In the hallway, Reyes caught up. You don't have to decide today, but Frank, if you go for trial, we've got enough to make it stick. The DA's ready to file the full charges. What would you do, I asked. Reyes sighed. I don't have skin in your game, but if it were me, I'd make sure the next person he hands a drink to doesn't end up in the ground. That night, my phone rang. It was Robert Carson. His voice was still weak but steady. Frank, I heard about the deal they're offering him. Word travels fast. You can't take it. Robert, no. Listen to me. If you do, he'll think he can come back from anything. Next time it won't be whiskey. It'll be something no one catches in time. Maybe it'll be you. Maybe it'll be someone else he's decided doesn't deserve to be here. I closed my eyes. The truth in his voice was like gravel, rough but solid. The next morning I drove to Gary's place. He was in his workshop tinkering with a busted outboard motor. Frank, he said, you look like a man deciding whether to pull a trigger. Something like that. We sat on overturned buckets, the smell of oil thick in the air. I told him about the plea deal. He wiped his hands on a rag. You already know what you're going to do. You just want me to make you feel better about it. Maybe. Gary tossed the rag onto the workbench. Frank, a man who keeps dosage notes, isn't careless. He's committed. You go easy now, you might as well hand him the pen and paper for his next list. That afternoon I drove past Ethan's house. The blinds were shut, the driveway empty. I thought about the garage, the one where he'd fixed up an old Ford when he was 16, grease on his hands, a grin on his face when the engine finally turned over. Back then, I thought it meant he could build something lasting. Now I wondered if it was just the first sign he could take things apart. At home, I opened the fireproof box again. The cards were all there. Robert's name, the lab results, the notebook page with FD. I laid them out like a hand of bad poker. Then I imagined shoving them back in and locking the box away, pretending they didn't matter. But the truth was, they mattered more than anything. The decision came like a door clicking shut. I called Reyes. Tell the DA I'll testify. Full charges. He didn't say good man or you're doing the right thing. He just said, understood. And that was enough. 3 days later, the hearing was set. Pre-trial motions, evidence lists, witness prep. Caldwell filed objections to half of it, but the judge overruled most. When they brought Ethan into the courtroom for the first time, he scanned the room and found me. His eyes didn't soften. If anything, they sharpened like I'd just made his list again. I held his gaze, because maybe I had. They call it a courtroom, but to me it felt like a minefield. Every word, every glance could blow up in your face. I'd walked in thinking the truth would stand on its own. Then I saw the way Ethan's lawyer was smiling at me like he already knew where I was going to step and how hard I was going to fall. The day of the evidentiary hearing, the benches were half full, but the air felt heavier than a packed church in August. I sat behind Reyes and the DA, my hands folded in my lap, pretending they weren't sweating. Ethan came in wearing county orange, wrists cuffed. He didn't look at me at first. Then he did just long enough to let the corners of his mouth twitch, not into a smile, but into something colder. I reminded myself why I was here. Robert's hospital bed, the lab report, That damn notebook. The judge called us to order. Reyes took the stand, first crisp and professional, walking the court through how the bottle had been received, tested, and confirmed as poisoned. Caldwell objected twice, claiming lack of chain of custody, but the judge overruled both. Then came my turn. The bailiff swore me in. I sat down the microphone close enough that I could hear my breathing. The DA started with soft pitches, my name, my age, where I lived, and my relation to the defendant. "Yes, Ethan is my son," I said, and it sounded strange in the open air, like it belonged to someone else's life. The DA guided me to the day of the gift. I told it straight, the package, the handwriting, the decision to give it to Robert, how Robert ended up in the hospital, how Gary tested the bottle. I kept my tone even, like Reyes told me, stick to the facts. Let the evidence do the work. Then Caldwell stood. "Mr. Dalton," he began, voice smooth as polished wood, "you claim you recognize my client's handwriting on the note. I don't claim. I know. But you haven't seen that handwriting in over 3 years, correct?" "That's correct. Is it possible then that you're mistaken?" "No." He leaned in, one hand on the rail. "You're telling this court you're certain beyond any doubt that a man's life should be ruined because you think a note looks like your son's handwriting?" I felt the first flare of heat in my chest. "I don't think. I know." Caldwell stepped back almost casually. "Interesting. Because we have here," he held up a paper, "a handwriting analysis from a certified examiner who says the note could not have been written by Ethan Dalton." Murmurs rippled through the room. The judge banged her gavel. The DA objected, questioning the report's validity. The judge allowed it for the record, but my stomach dropped. Caldwell smiled faintly. "And tell me, Mr. Dalton, isn't it true that you and my client have had a strained relationship for years, that you sold his mother's farm without consulting him?" The DA objected again, irrelevant and inflammatory. "Sustained," the judge said, but the damage was done. The jury had heard it. When it was over, I stepped down, my legs heavier than they'd been in years. Reyes met me at the table. "They're trying to paint you as bitter, resentful," he said quietly. "It's all they've got. Don't let it stick." But I could feel it sticking already. Outside on the courthouse steps, Robert was waiting, leaning on his cane. "They're throwing dirt," he said. "Doesn't matter if it's true, they just need enough to cloud the water." I nodded. "They've got a handwriting report now." Robert's mouth twisted. "Paid for, most likely. I've seen those in business disputes. You can buy an opinion the way you buy a tie." That night I sat on the porch, the crickets loud, the air smelling faintly of rain. I kept replaying Caldwell's questions. Each one had been aimed at making me look like a bitter old man with a grudge, not a father trying to survive his own son's betrayal. I poured myself a glass of water, stared at it for a long time. 3 years without whiskey, and yet here I was, feeling like I'd swallowed something that burned just as bad. The next morning, Reyes called. "Frank, I've got something," he said. "We pulled text records from Ethan's phone. There's a string of messages to a contact saved as RC the night before Robert got sick." "Robert Carson." "Not exactly. We traced the number. It's a burner phone bought 2 towns over. But the texts, Frank, they read like instructions. Dosage timing. And here's the kicker. They match the compound Gary found in the whiskey." I felt the knot in my chest loosen just slightly. "Does the DA have it?" "They will by noon. This changes the game." 2 hours later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Caldwell. "Mr. Dalton," he said smoothly, "you should know your testimony today. It only made me more certain you're letting old wounds cloud your judgment. If you push this to trial, everything about your past with Ethan comes out. Everything. You ready for that?" It wasn't a threat in tone, but in content. It was sharp as a knife. I didn't answer right away. I just let the silence stretch until he finally hung up. That evening I drove out to the lake. The water was still reflecting the low orange sun. I thought about the farm, about Linda's laughter on summer nights, about the boy Ethan used to be. And I thought about Robert pale in that hospital bed, tubes in his arm. When I left the lake, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't stepping back. The truth wasn't just on trial. It was mine to carry all the way to the verdict. The morning of the trial, I didn't shave. Not out of defiance, but because I wanted the jury to see the truth on my face, every line carved by years of work loss and the kind of betrayal you don't come back from. I wasn't here to look polished. I was here to end something. And if that meant watching my son in shackles, so be it. The courtroom was already humming when I walked in. The DA sat at our table shuffling papers. Reyes gave me a nod from the back row, the kind that says, "We've got this, but it's going to hurt." Ethan was brought in still in that same muted orange jumpsuit. His eyes swept the room, stopping briefly on me. This time there was no smirk, just something unreadable, like he was trying to decide whether I was even worth the effort of hating. The judge entered, the bailiff called for order, and suddenly the trial was underway. The DA's opening statement was clean, sharp, and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a case about trust. Trust given and trust betrayed in a way most of us can hardly imagine. You will hear how the defendant, Ethan Dalton, knowingly sent a gift laced with a deadly toxin to his father." I watched the jurors' eyes as the DA spoke. A few darted toward Ethan. Others kept their gaze locked on the DA. Nobody looked bored. Caldwell's opening was smooth as oil. He painted me as estranged, resentful, unwilling to reconcile, and hinted at family disputes over property as a motive for me to fabricate the entire thing. I kept my jaw still, but inside I could feel the old anger rise. The first witness was Robert Carson. He walked slowly to the stand, leaning hard on his cane, but his voice was steady. I remember the taste. Bitter. Not like any whiskey I'd had before. He told the jury. Within an hour I couldn't stand without help. I thought it was my heart giving out. Turns out it was someone else's idea entirely. When Caldwell cross-examined him, he tried to suggest Robert had mixed medications with alcohol and caused his condition. Robert's answer was, "Quiet, son. I've been on these meds for 10 years. Never ended up in the hospital until that night." The jury liked that answer. I could see it. Then Reyes took the stand with the phone records. The text to the burner phone, the timestamps, the chemical dosage instructions all laid out. Caldwell objected to their admissibility, citing privacy violations, but the judge overruled him. When the DA asked Reyes to read one of the messages aloud, the room went silent. "Make sure he gets it all in the first pour. Won't take much with his heart." Some jurors looked shocked. One woman in the front row pressed her lips together like she was holding back words. I felt my breath catch. Seeing the evidence in black and white was one thing. Hearing it out loud in that sterile courtroom was another. The DA called me next. I told the story again, birthdays, the bottle, giving it to Robert, and the hospital. I tried not to linger on the personal, but it's hard to talk about your son trying to kill you without the edges showing. Caldwell's cross-examination was harsher this time. "Mr. Dalton, are you aware that my client claims this was a gift purchased by his wife without his knowledge?" I shook my head. "No. And I don't believe it. You don't believe it because you don't want to believe it. You've built this entire case on assumptions." "No," I cut in. "On evidence. The kind your client left all over that bottle." The judge told me to answer only when asked, but I'd already seen Caldwell's jaw tighten. By the afternoon, both sides had rested their cases for the day. Tomorrow would be the closing arguments. I stepped outside into the cool air, but before I could take 2 breaths, I heard my name. Dad. I turned. Ethan stood just beyond the security checkpoint, a deputy at his elbow. His voice was low. "You think this makes you some kind of hero?" I looked him straight in the eye. "No. It makes me a man who's still alive." His lip curled. "This isn't over." The deputy pulled him away before I could answer. That night Reyes called. "You should know," he said, "Caldwell filed a motion for mistrial claims. New evidence wasn't disclosed in time. Will it stick? Not with this judge. But it's a scare tactic. They're trying to rattle you before tomorrow." I didn't say it out loud, but I knew they weren't just trying to rattle me. They were trying to see if I'd flinch. The next morning, I put on the same jacket I'd worn to Linda's funeral, not out of sentiment, but because it reminded me what real loss feels like. Whatever happened in that courtroom today, I'd already survived worse. When the judge called for closing arguments, the DA's voice was like steel wrapped in velvet. You have heard the testimony, you have seen the evidence, and you have read the words the defendant sent to his accomplice. This was no accident. It was a deliberate act against his father and his father's friend. We ask you to return the only verdict that reflects the truth guilty. Caldwell's closing was colder, almost clinical. He spoke of reasonable doubt, of family rifts, of the dangers of assuming intent. But when the jury left to deliberate, I saw something in their faces. Fatigue maybe, but also certainty. The wait felt longer than the trial itself. Reyes sat with me in the hallway, saying little. Robert dozed in a chair, his cane across his lap. Then the bailiff called us back in. The jury was ready. I watched their foreman stand. He didn't look at Ethan. He looked at the judge. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant. And in that half second before he finished, I realized I'd been holding my breath since the day that bottle showed up on my porch. Guilty. That one word landed like the first drop of rain on a roof after months of drought. It didn't thunder. It didn't roar. It just sank in quiet, but undeniable. And I knew there was no going back. Not for Ethan, not for me. The courtroom didn't explode in gasps like you see on TV. It just breathed differently. And for the first time in 3 years, I did too. The judge thanked the jury, dismissed them, and began reading the sentence. 25 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for the first 15. His voice was steady, measured, but I could feel the weight of every syllable pressing down. Ethan didn't flinch. He just sat there, hands cuffed in front of him, eyes fixed on some spot above the judge's head. If I didn't know better, I'd have thought he was bored. The bailiff moved to escort him out, but Ethan turned his head at the last moment. Our eyes met, and in that instant there was no courtroom, no jury, no uniformed officers, just the boy I'd once taught to throw a baseball staring back at the man he'd tried to kill. His lips barely moved. This isn't the last chapter. Then he was gone. I thought relief would flood in, but it didn't. What came instead was a hollow ache. Justice had been served on paper, but nothing on paper could glue back the pieces of what had shattered between us. Robert Carson put a hand on my shoulder as we walked out. You did what you had to do, Frank. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I nodded, but I didn't answer, because there was a part of me that still wondered if I'd lost more than I'd won. Outside, the air was sharper than it had been that morning. The sky had that late autumn brightness where the sun feels close but the wind cuts right through you. Robert's daughter pulled up in a blue pickup, helped him into the passenger seat, and gave me a small wave. I walked the 2 blocks to my truck alone. No reporters followed me. This wasn't the kind of case that made headlines outside our county. But in our small circle, it would echo for a long time. When I slid behind the wheel, I caught sight of something in the passenger seat, the envelope the court clerk had handed me before we left. Inside was Ethan's property inventory watch belt wallet and a folded note. The handwriting was his. You always said we were more alike than I wanted to admit. Maybe now you'll see that's not a compliment. No signature. Just that. I didn't crumple it. I folded it back up, slid it into the glove box, and started the engine. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way I hadn't felt in years. No cryptic messages, no unexpected knocks at the door. Robert recovered faster than the doctors expected, though his appetite for whiskey had evaporated entirely. Gary came by one afternoon with a paper bag. Inside was the small vial of whiskey he'd tested for me. Thought you might want to keep it, he said. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. I put it next to the glass I'd saved, the one Robert had drunk from that night. Together, they looked almost innocent, like props in a still life painting. But I knew better. 2 months after the verdict, Detective Reyes stopped by on his way home from a fishing trip. He leaned against my porch rail, the late sun catching in his sunglasses. "They found out where the poison came from," he said. "Wasn't Ethan's idea. At least not originally." My jaw tightened. Who his wife's cousin? Works in landscaping. Knows how to extract white snake root. He thought he was doing Ethan a favor, but Ethan's the one who decided to send it to you. It didn't change the facts. It didn't undo anything. But it did confirm what I'd felt in my bones. Ethan hadn't acted in a vacuum. Betrayal has roots, and sometimes they run deeper than blood. That winter I finally fixed the porch swing. The same swing I'd sat on the morning that the package arrived. The chains didn't creak anymore. The boards didn't splinter. One cold afternoon I sat there with a cup of black coffee, watching the sun drop behind the bare trees. On the small table beside me was the glass, the vial, and a single manila envelope labeled "Do not open," in my handwriting. Inside was everything: photos of Ethan as a boy, the court documents, and the note he'd left me. One day maybe I'd decide whether to keep it or burn it. For now it stayed sealed. People think revenge ends when the gavel falls, when the guilty are led away. But the truth is, revenge is just the surface. Beneath it are the years you can't get back, the conversations you'll never have, the family dinners that will stay empty chairs and cold plates. Justice gave me safety. It didn't give me peace. But as the wind shifted and carried the smell of wood smoke from somewhere down the road, I realized something: peace isn't given. It's built. One quiet afternoon at a time. One decision not to look back at a locked door. I raised my coffee cup to the empty yard. To endings I said aloud, and whatever comes after. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.